Okay, hello everybody. My name is Fran Morrin. I'm part of the department that handles direct payments and all things payment entitlements, young farmer scheme, as it was in the old CAP, the new complementary income support for young farmers, and also the National Reserve. We're joined here tonight by two colleagues, Lisa Walsh-Kemmis and Eddie Forde, who will give you quite a bit of detail on both of those schemes for those of you who might be interested. Just a little bit on the format tonight. I will begin with just an overview of the main areas of CAP. You've seen some of this already perhaps, but it's no harm just to go over that briefly again. Some of the main changes around payment entitlements as well. Then I'll hand over to my colleague Eddie Forde on the young farmer scheme, the new young farmer scheme, that is the complementary income support for young farmers, and also the National Reserve. And then following that to Lisa Walsh-Kemmis on the particulars around transfers of entitlements, which I know many of you who might be renting in or out entitlements and also of course land, you'll be keenly interested in that. All the way throughout this evening, you'll see in the panel for the webinar, typically down on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see where there's a facility there where you can ask questions. So as we go, you might think of questions that you'd like to ask. Please just pop them into that box and we'll monitor them here as we go along, and we'll go around through several rounds then of answering those questions after the three presentations are finished. So we'll probably group those questions because experience has shown that several people will have more or less the same question. So I hope that's of use to you. So, okay, well, so what we might do is we might begin then, and I'd like to give you just an overview of the changes, the headline changes, if you like, around payment entitlements from this year onwards. So I suppose the key message is that if you walked away from this webinar this evening and you kept these in your back pocket, the first of those is that all of the direct payment schemes are changing this year. And the reason why they're changing is because the regulations that govern them are changing, have changed, and there are different funding allocations under each category. And once you've got those different funding changes, that means that the money for each of those things that you see in your bank account come the tail end of the year will change as well. All payment entitlement values will change this year. Those of you who have already been into AgFood account that you might have logged into or had your advisor log into will see that your payment entitlement values are in there. So you'll see that there's been a step change this year. Again, that's because of the different funding allocation for them. Third point to walk away with is that this year and next year, so for 2023 and 2024, we are lifting the usual clawback on sales of entitlements without land, so where a farmer sells entitlements without land, for a 2-year period. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. So let's start then and look at the payment entitlements themselves. First thing to note is that there's no new allocation of payment entitlements this time around. It's not like it was back in 2015, the start of the last CAP program. There are no reference years. And what that means is that the number of payment entitlements that you might have will stay the same. If you had 23 last year, you will have 23 again this year. But the value of each of those payment entitlements, each of those sets of entitlements that you might have will change. The new average value for payment entitlements will be around 154.50, maybe there or thereabouts. Convergence continues through the new CAP program. Lower value entitlements will reach a minimum of 85% of the average by 2026, and they'll move to that value in about 4 equal steps. So for each of the years 23, 24, 25, 26. And of course, that upwards convergence is paid for or funded through a reduction in the value of higher value entitlements. That means that by 2026, all payment entitlement values will fall into a range from about €125 to €285. That will be the minimum and maximum values for any payment entitlements. Why do I tell you this? That's important because those of you who are considering transfers over the next couple of years will need to know what kind of values there are for payment entitlements, especially for ones that are converging upwards or converging downwards. And those transfers are still possible in largely the same way. There's transfers by gift and lease and sale and so on, among others. And your advisors, and some of you in particular, will be very used to those and very well familiar with them. So those are still possible in the same way. Last year, you would have received a statement of entitlements back in the start of last year, about February last year. And you'll receive another statement in the coming few weeks for the entire period of the new cap. But you don't have to wait for that, because you have two other options to see the values of your payment entitlements. You can log into your ag food and you'll be able to see them there for all the 5 years of the cap. And also, if you don't want to, if you don't have maybe a login to ag food, or you normally use your advisor for that, but you know you have your statement from last year, you'll be able to go to our cap calculator. And I'll give you some details on that at the end. That will give you a good idea of exactly what your payments would be from next year onwards. Back at the start, I mentioned that we're going to have some changes to the clawback where entitlements are sold without land. So up until now, from 15 to this year, if you sold, or last year rather, if you sold payment entitlements without land, that was subject to a clawback of 20%. So if I sold 10 entitlements without land to Eddie, Eddie received 8, of course, then the price that Eddie paid me reflected that 20%. So following much discussion with stakeholders and farm bodies and our own analysis over the past couple of years, we are lifting that clawback for a 2-year period. So for 2023 and 2024. So if I do that same action again in 2023, Eddie would receive 10 entitlements, and of course the price might reflect that as well, depending on the deal that's done. And why are we doing this? Well, it facilitates handovers of farms, it strengthens the active farmer, and it targets money at those who are actively farming. My colleague Eddie will talk to you much more about the supports available for generation renewal, but suffice to say that the twin approaches within direct payments of complementary income support for young farmers, which would be comprised of approximately 35 million a year, will provide quite a lot of funding for a new young farmer starting up their farming enterprise. We estimate a payment of about 170 per hectare for up to 5 years, to a maximum of 50 hectares. And that's a key change this year. The payment will no longer be based on payment entitlements held by the young farmer, but on eligible hectares. However, they will need one entitlement or part of an entitlement to be able to gain access to that scheme. We will also have a national reserve for every year of the coming cap from this year to 2027. And they will fund or provide an allocation of entitlements to both young farmers and new farmers. A new farmer is somebody who has never farmed in their own right before. I wanted to mention something about circumvention because I think it's an important topic and a point of fairness for all farmers. What is it? It is where the conditions are artificially created to gain benefit. You could look at it as getting around the rules. You know, the thing is that not only is there a point of fairness here, but the new cap and particularly oversight from Brussels in particular, Commission, Court of Auditors and more, will be considerably stricter on this point, with more monitoring on this in the future. So a question right now that many of you are probably thinking is, well, give me examples of what that looks like. So some examples would be where someone splits a herd purely to avoid capping of payments, or where they are selling entitlements with the sole purpose to clear land for someone else, a young farmer, to apply to the National Reserve for an allocation. or where there are applications made to the new Young Farmer scheme, where the young farmer is clearly not in financial or managerial control and may be working far away from home and have no involvement on the farm whatsoever. You know, the thing about the direct payments pot is that it is a closed fund. It's a fund that the government or the National Exchequer cannot add to or take away from. And that means that it's divided out among all farmers. So where advantage has been taken in one area, that's actually taken money from all farmers. So you hope you can see that there is a point of fairness in this. And of course, there are significant penalty risks, both for the farmer and in rarer cases for the advisors as well in those situations. So just to conclude out then, bear in mind all payment entitlements value changed this year. And really that is critical where you're agreeing leases, because the value of entitlements from last year to this year, there is a step change. You can imagine in situations where someone has an expectation because the lease had a certain value last year that it's going to be the same value again this year. There are changes to clawback around the sale of entitlements without land, bear that in mind, and all of our EU schemes are subject to rigorous audit and controls. Just to finish out then, I mentioned at the start that we had a calculator online. So it's very useful. We've had very good feedback and people find it very easy to use. The website address is quite hard to get to. It's an awkward address to give to you just off the tongue in a meeting like this. So the easiest thing for you to do is to just search CAP calculator DAFM, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, so DAFM in short. And it will nearly always be the very first search result that's returned. And all you need to do is go into that calculator and pop in the number of hectares, the number of entitlements, and the value, the unit value of those entitlements that you'd have from your statement last year. And it will give back to you your payments from 23 to 27 and show you your convergence path and so on. So it's a very useful thing to have.